Just a quick introduction. Liz Garrett is our new administrative assistant, and she had met the board here last week, and just wanted to introduce her to everybody here. So she's a familiar face that you will wonder when we talk about her. Okay, thanks, Liz. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hello to everyone.
Okay, let's get started, John.
You're up first, Frank.
I am. So it's 7:34 p.m. So on October 13th, I want to welcome everyone. Hold on, I'll get my picture on so you can see me. There we go. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on Omspa's draft strategic plan for 2023 to 2028. Omspa executive, along with our consultant, George Brook, are excited to bring this summary presentation to you. Please read the draft, now available on omspa.ca under the Strategic Plan tab, in its entirety afterwards, and feel free to submit written questions and concerns to our Executive Director, John Williams. There will be a 30-day window for these submissions, up to and including November the 13th. Omspa will also be presenting a shortened version at each local information day in 2023. For further comments, Administrative Assistant Liz Garrett, who I've just introduced, will be recording questions, answers, and comments during the webinar. John Williams, our Executive Director, is recording this webinar and will post a link under the strategic plan on omspa.ca when it's ready. John, can you set out the procedure for tonight and introduce our consultant to everyone?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We would ask if you can to type questions in the and comments in the chat, which I just referenced. Also, if you feel that you would prefer to speak, there is a little reaction button down there at the bottom, and you can raise your hand. You can see me just doing it there. And I'll do my best to make sure we get around and let everyone ask questions, whether that's in the chat or whether it's been put up with your hand. We'd also, of course, ask everyone to be respectful tonight. We have a lot of people on, so it's important that we all do our best to make sure that people get their chance to be heard. And I think that's about it. I'll introduce our consultant tonight, George Brook. We've been working with George through this whole process. He was our called the plays when we were doing a lot of the working groups, and coordinated those, provided support. And he's also been instrumental in herding all the cats in Omspa to get this strategic plan draft done. And I think you'll find that he presents things very well and logically. And so I will turn it over to him. He's got a PowerPoint all set up to summarize the strategic plan. And as Frank mentioned, if you want to see the full draft, then it is up under strategic plan on omspa.ca. There you go, George.
Thanks, John. And I am genuinely pleased to be talking to everyone today, presenting the hard work of so many of you in this draft strategic plan. A few introductory comments. First, I want to stress that this is an initial draft of the strategic plan. And myself and the team that's worked on pulling this together from all the hard work of the working groups always have made sure to remember that it is an initial draft and we're not to anchor on anything. We genuinely want and need the input of the full spectrum of membership. So This is not a fait accompli that we're presenting to you tonight. Far from it. This is our attempt, our best attempt to pull all the insight and recommendations from the working groups into this initial draft. Your input is the missing ingredient. I also want to just quickly talk about the structure of the presentation. So I'm going to walk through the draft strategic plan. I have a PowerPoint to help us follow along. And then we'll save the substantive questions and comments for after the presentation. However, if at any point during the presentation, you simply don't understand what the heck I'm talking about, maybe I'm using a word that's very jargony and you don't understand, or I'm just not making sense, please chime in and just ask for clarification, so that probably if you don't understand what I'm talking about, there's a whole bunch of other people that don't understand as well. All right, so fantastic. With that, let's dive right on in. So John, can I share my screen?
Should be able to. Yeah, you should be able to, George.
Okay.
No, sorry.
Excellent. Okay.
Looks good. You're in presentation mode, so.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's Randall. Maybe we should try to close off, like Liz and Frank. We can still see your picture, your faces. That way, it won't be distracting from what's on the screen. There we go. Thank you.
Frank is never distracting.
Thanks, George.
All right, so for the presentation tonight, we're going to be walking through the following sections. I'm going to start by talking about the strategic planning process itself, how it started, where we're at now, and where it's going. We're then going to just take a snapshot of Omspa as it exists right now. Who are we in 2022? We then turn to the vision for Omspa in 2028. This is at the end of the strategic planning window that we're talking about. What do we want Omspa to be? Where do we see us taking Omspa in these 5 years? Section D looks at the strategic roadmap. So we start digging into the details and the real substance of what the strategic plan is calling for. And then to wrap it up, we'll really briefly talk about measuring progress, how we ensure that we are succeeding in the goals we set. And we'll talk about the next steps in the strategic planning process. All right. So let's talk about the strategic planning process. Omspa works in 5-year planning windows. And so we are currently deep towards the end of the previous planning window, and we are in the middle of developing the 5-year strategic plan for 2023 to 2028. And you know, if you do the math, that's 6 years listed, but it's because the calendar year doesn't fall, because the Omspa year doesn't fall directly on the calendar year. So fundamentally, the strategic planning process is about looking at what progress was made against previously established goals, examining how the Ontario maple market is evolving, and developing a deep understanding of the needs and wants of Omspa members. And all those ingredients go together into a 5-year strategic plan that establishes the strategic priorities and lays out the roadmap for achieving these priorities. So one of your members, Randall Goodfellow, put an enormous amount of time into developing a really best of class strategic planning process to allow Omspa to develop the best strategic plan possible. This plan has evolved as it's gone along. This past spring wasn't the easiest for a number of Omspa members and threw a bit of a wrench in the works. And so for those of you who are familiar with how we talked about the strategic planning process in the past, you'll notice that phase 2 has evolved and changed. And then another big difference is that in practice, phase 2, member engagement, and phase 3, developing the strategic plan, have been integrated and kind of woven together. So take it back to the beginning. Phase 1 was developing input to the strategic planning process from working groups. This involved 10 working groups that looked at key issues of importance to Omspa membership. And this phase ran from November 2021 to the end of April of this year. Phase 2, membership engagement, involves directly engaging membership on the strategic plan as it takes place. The working groups were extremely important tool for developing developing and collecting member insight and engagement and recommendations. This presentation tonight is the start of the second important touch point, where there's an initial draft of the strategic plan, and the membership is welcomed and encouraged to provide detailed suggestions and input on this plan. This phase is going to run through till November 13th, and there's some further slides that address exactly how to submit your input. And then phase 3 is developing the strategic plan itself. And so again, we've woven those together. And so a little bit later in the presentation, I'll go through the next steps, exactly how we're going to go back and forth between soliciting input, revising the draft, moving forward. So about the working groups, this is the work of phase 1 that began in November of 2021. So there was 10 working groups. There's a list of all the different areas that they addressed here. Over 100 Omspa members and a few select outside experts directly participated and contributed to the work of the 10 working groups. There was immense amount of input from a lot of the Omspa leadership. I'm thinking of Frank, your president, and John, your executive director, and Randall Goodfellow, who designed the process itself. And then the working groups. I have worked with a whole lot of different groups across Canada. I've worked with some of the smartest researchers out there, and I have never seen anything like the extraordinary output from the working groups. The quality of material, the quality of recommendations and insights that were developed were just second to none. I can't speak highly enough about it. I have a link to the omspa.ca website here, where you can take a look at the working group reports. And if any of these 10 areas are of interest to you, I would say it's a must do to go read the report. There's so much quality input there. As you'll see as we go through this strategic plan, some of the works of the working group, some of the output of the working group directly found its way into the strategic plan. For example, the quality assurance and food safety group, their outputs and recommendations directly shaped the quality assurance pillar that we're going to go over later. Some of the other groups, like the Jurisdictional Scan or the data group, did phenomenal work. The cost of production group would be in that category as well. That isn't so much directly reflected in the strategic plan, but was extremely important to informing the work of the other working groups and to just setting the context for the work that we're doing now. So yeah, again, I can't say enough about the quality of the work of the working groups. I'd also like to say that this strategic plan, in a lot of ways, directly builds on the previous strategic plan, the one that we're finishing up now. Omspa is indebted to the strategic foundation that's been laid by the hard work of past Omspa leadership. So the link for this strategic plan's here. And again, it's worth reading. It's not long. I think it really provides an excellent counterpoint to the current strategic plan and shows a very natural evolution of Omspa's thinking. Call to action. So just want to stress that your input's needed. This draft strategic plan is designed to solicit your input, your suggestions, your comments, your questions. Please do it through email. Email address is here. John will collate your input and bring it to the strategic planning team, and we will very directly address it. And it will, that is the body of our next phase of work. We need your input. We really want your input. Please give us your input. So now we're going to switch to examining where Omspa is now, just so that we're grounded as we look at our plans for the future. So as of 2022, Omspa is staffed by an executive director, half-time paid position. It has a very large board of directors and associated committees comprised of volunteer Omspa members. Omspa currently has approximately 600 members. We operate on an annual budget of roughly $72K for core operations. And then in 2022, there was a further $1,000 and $55,000 in government grants for strategic initiatives. So that amount would vary year to year. So previous to 2021, Omspa was conducting business as usual, guided by the 2018 to 2022 strategic plan. Since 2021, Omspa leadership has been focused first on identifying and engaging members with the skill sets needed by Omspa to develop a comprehensive strategic plan, and then on undertaking the strategic planning process itself. And there's been thousands of hours of input by member volunteers so far in the process. It really speaks highly to the ability for Omspa to motivate its members. So that's a snapshot of Omspa. How does Omspa compare to other ag organizations in Ontario? So the Jurisdictional Scan Working Group looked at a number of different organizations and identified Ontario Beekeepers Association as the most relevant. They have very similar impact on GDP, kind of similar membership. They really are a fairly close analog in a number of ways. The key findings were that while the OBA serves an industry roughly the same size and impact as maple syrup producers, they have 7 full-time employees as compared to Omspa's half-time employee, John, who just does phenomenal work for you. Their annual budget is approximately $725,000 as compared to Omspa's budget of about $228,000. Very interestingly, membership fees provide only 19% of the OBA's income. So their primary source of income is from government grants for strategic initiatives. And a primary takeaway from this comparison is that Omspa appears to be significantly under-resourced compared to other similar Ontario ag organizations. It's also worth noting that the OBA went through a growth trajectory that is also very relevant for Omspa. So right now they have a budget of $725K, and again, only 19% is for member dues. The bulk of the rest is from government grants. And they, in their conversations with us, have identified the fact that they're very good at getting grant money now. It's a core skill, and it provides a large portion of their budget. However, it took them a while to get to the point where they were the masters of, one-off annual strategic grants. And they actually had multiple years of funding to expand their operations and to figure out how to fund this expansion on a sustainable basis. So one of the recommendations that we'll see in the strategic plan is that OMAFRA provide the same sort of bridge growth financing to Omspa to allow it to become what it needs to become to best serve you, the members, and the growing industry, while at the same time giving time for Omspa to figure out how to develop more sustainable income to fund this expanded scope. The jurisdictional scan also compared Omspa to maple producer associations in other relevant North American jurisdictions. And the analysis really ended up focusing on New York, Vermont, and New Brunswick as the most relevant to the Ontario situation. The key findings of this analysis were that Omspa is understaffed and under-resourced when compared to maple producers associations in competing jurisdictions. All three jurisdictions have over one full-time equivalent compared to Omspa's half-time. And in addition, Vermont and New York have actually extensive extension staff, so applied research and training staff employed by allied research organizations that effectively greatly expand the scope of services offered to members. This comparison also identified that Omspa's board is dramatically larger than the boards of other maple producers associations. So on this next slide, we've just pulled together some of the interesting data points from this analysis. We see a production base on the top left, just shows that in terms of liters of maple syrup produced, Omspa is kind of sitting in the middle. I think Vermont's notable given the size of the state compared to the size of its industry, and suggests the kind of future expansion that's possible in Ontario. Number of board members, I think that in the middle there, that graph tells a story by itself. New York is a bit of an outlier, and it itself has an extremely large board, and Omspa is still twice as large or more than twice as large as the New York board, and 4 or 5 times larger than any of the other boards. Regional budgets, again, it shows that Ontario has a modest regional budget, especially compared to New York. And what's not shown in that table is that the effective budget for Vermont maple syrup services to members is significantly higher than that due to allied research organizations. On the bottom left, we just show the staffing levels of the various associations. And then on the bottom right, we have approximate membership. Okay. So now we're going to move into the Omspa's vision for 2028. So this needs to speak to you, right? It's your organization. This vision statement, mission statement, the strategic goals we're going to look at, and the operating principles. These are pretty profound statements of what Omspa is, what it intends to do, and how it intends to do it. And so this needs to resonate with you. So vision statement, Omspa envisions a robust and growing maple syrup industry in Ontario that embraces the highest standards of quality assurance and professionalism to provide exceptional maple products to Ontario, Canadian and international markets under a brand that is synonymous with the highest quality. As I'm reading that, I realize it's going to take a long time just to read that through, and I don't think that's the most effective way. I would say that a bunch of the Omspa leadership has put some thought into these vision and mission statements. So I'm going to let you read them on your own. And again, we very much want input on this. Do these statements resonate with you? That being said, I'm going to move along just to make sure that we efficiently cover the whole thing. So again, super important. The fact that I am not reading them through does not reflect on their importance. I think it's just the efficiency of the process here. So Omspa's macro or highest level ultimate strategic goal is to increase the value for Ontario maple syrup producers. We could leave it there, but we could also expand on it by saying, by driving increases in demand for Ontario maple syrup and in realizing premium pricing for Ontario maple syrup due to differentiation based on quality. We want to make maple syrup production in Ontario more profitable, more sustainable, more worthwhile for producers. And the two primary mechanisms to do that are both growing the size of the market, the demand for Ontario maple syrup, and in realizing a premium pricing for Ontario maple syrup due to a strong association of the Ontario maple syrup brand with a quality product. And there's direct analogy for that in other jurisdictions, especially Vermont. So to achieve this ultimate strategic goal, we've looked at what are the strategic goals for each of the primary areas of Omspa activities. So there's governance. Strategic goal, optimize and rationalize Omspa structure for maximum impact and efficiency following organizational best practices. Applied research and training. Develop Ontario's capacity for applied research and training focused on Ontario maple products production. Quality assurance. Drive adoption of quality assurance best practices across Omspa's membership and Ontario maple products production. Member services. Evaluate and optimize the services and benefits Omspa provided to its members. Marketing and branding. Develop and execute a substantive multi-year marketing branding campaign aimed at the Ontario market. And finally, and this is more of a new focus for Omspa, government and industry relations. Expand and entrench government and industry relations capacity, developing strong internal competencies and securing government funding for industry priorities. So what we have here is we have the 6 primary areas that Omspa is focused on. And then for each of these 6 primary areas, we have a strategic goal for the next 5 years. Omspa's operating principles. This is just a statement of who we are, how we do business. I think they're straightforward. I won't read them all. You know, I think they start with responsibility, honesty, integrity, respect, and good faith. You know, ends with collaborating, partnering, and creating equality of access, right? So it's just really about how we play well with others here. There are some important elements that we should highlight too. So, you know, operating principle D is Omspa will provide leadership and environmental stewardship of Ontario's maple forests. And so that's, you know, an emphasis that I think is important to highlight. And number B, operating principle B, Omspa will pursue professionalism in all its activities and the operations of its members. And so there was so much discussion about that emerging from the working groups and the work of the strategic planning group that we've really highlighted professionalism in the strategic plan as a key concept to guide Omspa over the following 5 years. And you know, professionalism refers to how relations are conducted with other members, clients, suppliers, and government partners, relates directly to quality assurance, budgeting and counting with excellence, you know, how marketing and training initiatives are designed and delivered, and how member benefits are delivered. These are all, you know, these are all the heart and soul of what Omspa does. And professionalism talks directly to just the excellence with which Omspa conducts these core activities. So now we're going to actually start looking at how we propose this, how the strategic roadmap proposes that Omspa achieves its strategic goals. So looking at this table here, on the left, we have the 6 areas of focus for Omspa. We're calling them pillars, the 6 pillars of Omspa: the governance, applied research and training, quality assurance, member services, marketing, branding, government and industry relations. The next column, we have the strategic goals. So we've just gone over the strategic goals. So those are listed here. And then in the column on the right, we list the major areas of undertaking for each of these strategic goals. So I'm not going to go through this column here, because instead we'll actually take a deep dive into each one of these briefly, so that you can really see what is being proposed with the strategic plan. If you want to get a quick snapshot of what major activities that are new to OMSPA are being proposed. Reading through this column here, the major areas of undertaking, it gives you that quick snapshot. So, you know, later on when you're following up and thinking about it, it might be worth it taking a look at this major areas of undertaking list, just to you know, refresh yourself as to what's new about the strategic plan. So this is the top of a logic model. And a logic model is a structure that's used certainly in federal. This particular logic model is used heavily in federal funding agencies, and variations of this logic model concept are all through the Ontario government. And so the strategic plan is a concrete roadmap for OMSPA over the next 5 years. It's also a tool to start unlocking the government funding to enable this roadmap. And so this logic model is one of those tools that will make the government happy. However, I think it's an interesting presentation of the strategy. And for some people, it really helps them see everything in a very structured, logical way. So I'm just going to flip over here. So this is the logic model in full. You can see it has our ultimate outcome. It has our immediate outcomes. It has our OMSPA pillars. And then under each pillar, we have an immediate outcome. We have the outputs. So this is the concrete things that OMSPA is going to do. And then we have the activities, and that is the details of how OMSPA is going to do this. So this will be made available for you to take a look at. It's included as an addendum to the strategic planning document. So if your brain likes this sort of really clear-cut, siloed kind of structure, then this is a great place to look to get a sense for how the strategic plan hangs together from a logic point of view.
George, it's Ray. What do those numbers mean? 1100, 1200, 1300?
Good question. So that's just an internal numbering.
Tracking?
Yeah. So you see, pillar 1, the immediate outcome is 1100, and then outputs are 1110, 1120, 1130. So it's just a way to kind of relate different levels of the model to each other. If that makes sense.
Okay, thanks.
Ray, this can also be used on an ongoing basis with the board and the committee chairs to check where we're at on various activities.
Well, it's like cost centers. We used to use numbers in cost centers for budgeting.
Or activity
right?
centers or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm fine. Thank you.
George, maybe you just can take one of the pillars and just walk right through from top to bottom.
Yep, sure. So let's take pillar number 1. So we'll start from the very top. So for the ultimate goal for OMSPA for the next 5 years is increase the value for Ontario maple producers. So the relevant intermediate outcome is provide significant value to members and their operations, which directly relates to pillar 1 of OMSPA, which is member services. So this intermediate outcome provides significant value to members in their operations. It's fairly vague. The immediate outcome starts really honing in on what specifically we're proposing to do. So the immediate outcome is to optimize the services and benefits OMSPA provides to its members. So what does that mean? What are the actual outputs if we're going to achieve this outcome, right? So we've mapped out 5 specific outputs that OMSPA is going to achieve. First, leadership is going to be secured to lead the optimization of member services initiative. So we're going to identify who has the skills, who is willing and able to take this on. Second output, a comprehensive evaluation of OMSPA member services with concrete recommendations for optimization and improvement. So that's the heavy lifting. That's analyzing the current state of member services, how members feel about them, and developing concrete recommendations for improving and optimizing what's being offered. So next stage, the output is a detailed operational plan for optimizing member services that's ratified by the board. So the concrete recommendations are translated into specific roadmap with dates, actions, timelines, responsibility assigned, and that's ratified by the board. Fourth output is simply having Omspa staff and the committee members execute on the operational plan. And then the fifth output is ongoing improvement to member services. So that's just a step that cements the fact that this isn't a one-off. It's not, we're going to improve member services now and then skate on that for quite a while. It's every year there's going to be a renewal, a reevaluation, ongoing improvements. So then the final step of this logic model, so we'll go back here to this, the first output. So leadership secured to lead optimization of member services initiative. That translates into the following 3 specific activities. Short list of members with relevant skill sets identified, short list engaged on willingness and ability, leadership for initiative put in place. And each one of these outputs has a similar list of activities. And so that's the structure, and that kind of top-down hierarchy is just repeated for each of the 6 pillars. Now, the one thing you'll notice is, like, you know, we've listed applied research and training right now. It's under the outcome of realizing premium pricing for Ontario maple syrup due to differentiation based on quality. And this is due to the fact that applied research and training has a huge role to play in setting and, you know, encouraging high quality standards. But it's also very true that applied research and training is going to provide significant value to members in their operations, for example. So there's definitely a lot of kind of cross-cutting, you know, cross-cutting impact. But at the same time, this format focuses us to be extremely logical, extremely clear. And I think it provides a really clear-cut view of what's being proposed over the next 5 years. Okay, for the sake of time, I think we should keep moving. But I'm certainly more than happy to talk about the logic model in more depth during the discussion period afterwards. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at each of the 6 pillars of Omspa activity and really dig into the nuts and bolts of what is being proposed for each of these pillars. So I'm just apologize here. I am queuing up my notes to help me. So for each pillar, we'll follow the same format. I'll give a bit of background context, and then we'll just quickly look at the primary outputs. We won't dig into the details of the activities so much, but they are all there laid out clearly, and estimated completion dates as well. And you'll notice at the top of each pillar, we start with the intermediate outcome and the immediate outcome. So we just are focused on what we're trying to accomplish here. So member services. The member engagement working group was formed in the fall of 2021, and its focus was on developing recommendations to Omspa's strategic planning process about the needs and expectations of members and how to best meet these needs. I was blown away by the work of this group. You know, Bob, its fearless leader, it was just really, really top class work. The strategic plan lists the link to read the report, and it's well worth it. There's just a ton of information. The primary tool used by the member engagement group was a detailed member survey. And really the magic was in both the formulation of the questions, a lot of attention went into that, and it was also in the analysis that came out of it. Key takeaways was that developing a comprehensive member engagement strategy is a near-term high priority goal, that while there is significant loyalty within Omspa membership, there is signs for concern, and especially that the youngest age group is the least loyal and is actually far less loyal than other age groups. In addition, the impact of COVID will have, lessened the connection, the impact of Omspa on the day-to-day life of members. So, there's a call to action coming out of this group. And they further call for that the development of the membership engagement strategy should be tasked to a committee with broad representation from across OMSPA's full range of activities. So the intermediate outcome identified by the work of this group is that OMSPA needs to provide significant value to members in their operations. The immediate outcome, what the focus is for the next 5 years, is to optimize the services and benefits OMSPA provides to its members. So I'm realizing that we just actually reviewed this as we went through the logic model. So this is literally the outputs that we just reviewed in pillar 1 of the logic model. So leadership secured to lead this reevaluation, this optimization of OMSPA membership. Calls for a comprehensive evaluation of OMSPA member services. And again, the work of the member engagement working group provided a really strong foundation to continue that work from. These concrete recommendations get translated into a detailed operational plan that gets ratified by the board. And then OMSPA staff and the committee members execute on the operational plan, evaluate progress, refocus, improve.
I think, George, what this graph adds or slide adds is the timelines and completion dates, which were also reviewed by people who are likely to take responsibilities for these pillars. Let's say a pillar is somewhat equal to what we call currently the committees of OMSPA.
Yep, thanks, Randall. As a general statement, we found that the initial timelines we set were very optimistic. When we actually looked at them in aggregate, and we realized, we would prefer to meet the critical goals of each of the pillars right away. But in the end, there was a lot of adjusting and kind of looking at the big picture to develop a timeline that felt realistic, that the goals were realistically doable in the time that we lay out. You'll see from member services that the timeline happens fairly quickly. We're talking about getting the leadership of this initiative in place beginning of next year. The comprehensive evaluation recommendations being developed for the end of next year. And then this recommendations being operationalized in 2024. And really the plan being executed and completed by the end of 2025. And from that point on, it becomes a process of annual evaluation and, improvement. So let's move to the next pillar, quality assurance. So the quality assurance working group developed a detailed understanding of how quality assurance and food safety might impact Ontario producers, and produced concrete recommendations for the strategic planning process. The working group concluded that on balance, implementing a robust food safety and quality assurance program, although really I have to be clear that the emphasis was on quality assurance and food safety, with quality assurance primary, would deliver significant advantages to Ontario maple producers. And they identified 3 primary advantages. So one is a marketing advantage. So producers of high quality maple syrup can be more profitable if they can sell their maple syrup at higher unit prices and have a committed set of repeat customers. And the quality of Ontario maple syrup represents a genuine opportunity to capitalize on that Vermont has gone heavily down this road, and they have seen a genuine premium pricing. They have genuine. Sorry, I'm feel like I'm getting sick and I'm a little fuzzy, but I'm going to try to hold it together. Vermont has been able to realize some premium pricing based on marketing the quality of their brand. So if you see Vermont maple syrup in New York City, for example, it will be marketed as a premium, high quality product differentiated from other maple syrups. The second advantage that the quality assurance identified was retail expansion. The large retail partners are increasingly expecting strong food safety and traceability practices to be in place. And so producers, it's really a reality now, and certainly will be even more of a reality tomorrow. We'll need to have strong and verifiable certification in place to be able to sell into large retail chains. And then the collective benefit, and this is true of any sector. A small minority of maple producers can ruin the reputation of the entire Ontario maple syrup sector by producing and selling low quality products. And so it's really important that Omspa creates a supportive environment with training and other resources that helps and enables all the maple syrup producers in Ontario to continuously improve their products. So taking those three together, marketing advantage, retail expansion, and collective benefits, the Quality Assurance Working Group came forward with three primary recommendations. So the first immediate priority was revitalizing the existing best practice manual. And in fact, the suggestion is that Omspa create two best practices manuals. One is tailored specifically for more of the hobbyist type producer, and one is tailored specifically for large operators. And by tailoring it to those two audiences, the working group foresees much greater uptake. You know, it's a tailored set of recommendations and training material and resources that would apply specifically to you and your operation, and would just speak more directly to the members. The second recommendation: develop enhanced training and outreach based on the renewed best practices manuals. And so that speaks again to really helping and providing every advantage to Ontario producers to achieve extremely high quality of production. And for a lot of producers, they do produce extremely high quality product. I would say the great majority. And this actually provides an opportunity to be recognized for that, and to simply gain a marketing advantage for doing what you already do in a recognized way. The final recommendation from the Quality Assurance Working Group is of a bit different nature, and it's a recommendation to consider consider the advantage and disadvantages of developing a certification program. So the working group, I think it's fair to say, saw that certification could potentially be central to Ontario maple production, but that it was in no way a straightforward issue, and that there would certainly be strong views on both sides of the issue. And so the recommendation is that the board and Omspa at large look closely at that and figure out if that's a route that should accompany the revitalized best practices manuals. So
George,
let's
I
look.
think it also is that we know that some of our competitors are moving towards certification, Vermont and New York. And so we need to stay on top of what they're doing because they're in our marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's safe to say that there's very good reasons for going that route, and then there's also some genuine fears in the membership. I think largely around the burden of what certification would mean. Okay, so let's look at how that translates to concrete outputs. So updated and improved BPM best practices manual, with one manual targeting hobbyists and one targeting commercial producers. That comes first. Training and educational resources developed based on ongoing best practice manual work. Deliver training and education based on these updated best practices. Then the ART staff, applied research and training staff, engaged to build out training and education resources. So that output requires a bit of further explanation. You'll see in the next pillar that there's a recommendation to create the Maple Applied Research and Training Center in Ontario. And one of the key roles of the center would be to provide high quality training and education resources. So this output calls for, when this center is in place, then Omspa engages directly with their staff to build out quality assurance related training and education resources. And then the final output is actual transfer of the responsibility for delivery of the training and education resources to this new MART Center, as we're calling it. So the best practices manual, that process is proposed to get going pretty much right away and to have it complete by the end of 2024. It is a large body of work, according to our expert who participated in this working group. And it was his timeline that certainly for the scope of work that he envisioned, it would be about a 2-year process to develop the 2 manuals. The training and educational resource development happens concurrently, and so it's ready to go when the revised best practices manuals are ready to go. The delivery of the training and education based on updated best practices would happen as soon as this new material is in place, and then would certainly start happening with the release of the revised best practices manuals. Then the last 2 outputs, again, relating to the MART Center, they kick into place in 2025, when the MART staff would be brought on board, and then primary responsibility would be transferred to them in 2026, when the center starts operating. I realize I glossed over the intermediate and immediate outcomes. So again, just to focus us on what the primary area of activity in this pillar will be. So realized premium pricing for Ontario maple syrup due to differentiation based on quality. And then the immediate outcome is drive adoption of quality assurance best practices across Omspa's membership and Ontario maple products production. So all these outputs and activities are directly meant to achieve the immediate outcome and on to the intermediate outcome. Okay, so we're going to go to pillar 3 now, applied research and training. So the applied research and training working group identified that Ontario research and training focused on maple product production is unfunded and unorganized compared to competitor jurisdictions. At the same time, the group identified the fact that there is lots going on in other jurisdictions in terms of applied research and training, highlighting specifically Quebec, Vermont, New York. And so the conclusion is that Ontario, we need to boost our capacity in applied research and training, but we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can tap into this body of high quality research and training being produced in other jurisdictions and bring it to Ontario, adapt it for Ontario realities without doing it from the ground up. So the working group really wanted to highlight that this was a high priority, and that they would list the following drivers. So the first, there's a looming skill shortage. We're seeing this in Quebec. Comprehensive training at the college level will be essential to fill the pending gap in, trained, knowledgeable sugar bush operators. The rate of change in Ontario maple sector has never been higher, driven by climate change, rapidly increasing demand for maple products, and other factors. And so ongoing professional development can play a significant role in equipping Ontario producers to adapt. The applied research and training is fundamentally about driving productivity. And so there is the promise of improvements in productivity across the sector through applied research and training. And finally, applied research and training is a key tool to drive increased quality assurance and food safety standards across Ontario production and all the benefits that come out of that. The working group actually did quite a lot of preliminary work, and some of the leadership of Omspa had actually done quite a bit of work even before the working group and exploring possibilities. And the working group and the Omspa leadership have identified Algonquin College as both an able and a willing partner in realizing this maple-focused applied research and training center. And so keep that in mind. So when we talk about the MART Center, we're talking about a center housed within Algonquin College, taking advantage of their administrative infrastructure, of their office space, even potentially of lab and research facilities. So the recommendations of this working group translate into an intermediate outcome of realized premium pricing for Ontario maple syrup due to differentiation based on quality. The immediate outcome, the focus of this pillar, is develop Ontario's capacity for applied research and training focused on Ontario maple products production. The outputs here are all focused on realizing the MART Center, or I'll just call it the MART Center from now on. So detailed proposal for proposed MART Center is completed. Multi-year funding secured for launch of the MART Center. Detailed agreement negotiated with Algonquin. The MART Center established, so staffed up, governance put in place, strategic plan and initial programming developed. And finally, the MART Center starts providing comprehensive applied research and training services to Ontario maple producers. So this will be a process. This process is going to take some time. Developing the detailed proposal is slated for next year. Securing funding and negotiating with Algonquin would be the following year, 2024. 2025 would be focused on establishing the MART Center, putting all the pieces in place. And then the beginning of 2026 would see the actual launch of the center. And while, I'm an eternal optimist and I feel like, geez, 4 years, like we could build anything in 4 years. Even this lengthy timeline is, it's aggressive. I think it's doable, but work on this would need to happen, start fairly quickly, and there would be, a lot of upfront work required to secure the funding. Once this funding is secured, then we're off to the races. But to get to that point, will require a strong focus.
George, just to ensure people that we won't do training. We won't only do training when the MART Center comes in place. We will do it from now on these subjects that are of importance, but we want to formalize it into a center. And one of the reasons why to formalize into the center is that it allows for funding from different sources when you have an educational and research organization involved. So that's the reason.
Thanks.
Oh, George, we lost your audio.
Am I back?
Yes, you're good.
I'm good now. Okay, sorry about that. Falling apart here. All right. This slide provides a snapshot of what the proposed March Center is all about. So just to quickly walk you through it, we start at the top left. We have demand for research and training is identified by the members of Omspa, the board of Omspa, the wider maple products industry, other outside sources, and government. And this is translated into, this is kind of aggregated, collated by the Omspa Applied Research and Training Committee, and it's fed into the March Center. This is what matters to us. The March Center figures out how to meet this identified need. And it looks to existing supply, Omspa, ACERC in Quebec, University of Vermont, Cornell. It also looks at new supply. So, you know, being part of the funding or the initiation for new research and training. So MAFRA, Omspa, again, ACER, U of Vermont, Cornell. And then, so the March Center takes the identified need, matches it with existing or new supply, and provides outputs such as one-day seminars and workshops, short courses over a number of days, training at levels resulting in certificates, part of diploma degree programs, virtual training, videos. So we can certainly talk more about the March Center in the questions and answers afterwards. I hope we've given you a brief snapshot of what it's about. You know, and we're looking at, you know, a staffing level of 2 in effect. Kind of one focused on the research side and one focused on the training side. So pillar 4 of our 6 pillars, marketing and branding. So the product differentiation market development working group took a detailed look at the role of marketing and product differentiation in delivering increased value to Ontario maple syrup producers. The conclusion was that marketing and branding is essential to the future of Omspa members, and that there is a real and exciting opportunity to develop a unique brand for Ontario maple syrup with carefully thought out product differentiation, essential to developing a successful Ontario maple syrup brand. And so this you know, carefully thought out product differentiation, it would be differentiation based on the quality, primarily on the quality of Ontario maple syrup. The working group noted that the kind of comprehensive marketing branding campaign envisioned would require expertise outside of Omspa. This is not something that could be driven internally by members. And therefore, it'll be necessary to bring an on board food branding specialist or firm or consultant. And the working group was also clear to note that this marketing branding campaign, this new multi-pronged marketing branding campaign, should be seen as a direct evolution of the existing Ontario, Sweet Ontario campaign. So the work and the recommendations of the marketing and product differentiation working group translated into an intermediate outcome of driving increased demand for Ontario maple products, and an immediate outcome of developing and executing a substantive multi-year marketing branding campaign aimed at the Ontario market. So the outputs envisioned to realize these outcomes would be, first, revise the mandate for the Marketing and Promotions Committee. It would need to be expanded to encompass a multi-year, multi-pronged marketing branding campaign. The second output would be securing funding for a multi-year marketing branding campaign. And the working group identified that for this marketing branding campaign to be effective, it has to be multi-year. It can't be a one-year one-off. And it's not worth initiating the campaign without securing multi-year funding upfront. After the funding is secured, the next phase is develop a fully costed, fully developed comprehensive marketing branding campaign. And this would include a robust performance management framework that would be used to monitor progress against clear objectives, so that in this marketing branding campaign, an actual concrete evaluation of progress against clearly defined goals would be front and center always. And then the final output is actually executing on the multi-year marketing branding campaign. So the deliverable from this working group contains more details on what this marketing branding campaign would look like. It would be, the suggestion was that it would be heavily social media based. It would be very much based on the authentic real world stories of Ontario producers, family heritage, multi-100-year heritage of production, quality. So yeah, I think if you're interested in how Omspa might present itself to the world and might start realizing premium pricing on Ontario maple syrup, it's well worth taking a look at the deliverable from this working group. In terms of timelines, this work really starts getting going in 2003. The objective would be to secure funding kind of halfway through 2024, which I think is realistic. The next year, more or less, is devoted to developing the multi-pronged marketing branding campaign. There's a lot of details in the working group's deliverable on that process, and so it would not be a surface level kind of marketing, kind of rote marketing exercise. It would be really digging into what fundamentally Omspa is about, what Ontario maple producers are about, what's real, what's authentic, what stories we can tell. And then the final output is simply executing on this plan with excellence. The year, that would start towards the end of 2025 and would be ongoing for multiple years, certainly to the end of the 2028 planning window and probably beyond that. All right, pillar 5 of 6, governance. So there was a working group called the Financial Sustainability and Effectiveness of Omspa group, and they conducted an analysis of Omspa's governance and financial sustainability and brought forward 3 conclusions to the strategic planning process. So first conclusion, Omspa is understaffed. We already talked about that. Second conclusion, Omspa's governance structure is bloated and unbalanced from a representation perspective, as measured both by number of members and by taps under production. So to explain what's meant by that, currently each local has 2 representatives on the Omspa board, but when you compare locals, they do vary very dramatically in terms of both absolute numbers of members or looking at numbers of taps under production. So, in a local that has a tiny number of members, each one of those members has very direct representation on, they send 2 board members. And compared to a local that has a much larger number of members, they still only send 2 board members. So in effect, some just by the composition of the locals compared to each other, some Omspa members have more representation, some have less, and that's a very poor model of governance. And then the final conclusion was that the analysis was that some Omspa locals are underperforming, and that measures should be taken to improve how locals operate. So I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit more about the findings of this working group. So again, talking about the structure of the board. So there's the way the board structures is unbalanced representation, which we just talked about. In addition, the board is just simply huge. And that makes for unwieldy governance. Best practices in organizational governments would suggest a much smaller, more efficient board than is currently in place. The working group also identified that there are some areas, governance areas, that Omspa was actually at risk. And addressing these two issues is a high priority. So one is there's the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, which came into force in 2021. And Omspa needs to make any necessary changes to conform with this new act before October 2024. So that's one area that just simply has to be addressed. And then the work of the working group also identified that Omspa's local associations may, in legal terms, be unincorporated associations. And if that's true, liability falls to the directors and members personally. And that's a situation that's unacceptable from a governance point of view. So these are both kind of concrete governance matters that need to be addressed in short order. And then I'll just touch on, before we look at the outputs for this pillar, I would like to quickly touch on some of the issues facing locals. So in some locals, there's a lack of critical mass and a lack of volunteer time, which means some locals are unable to provide full member services. Some locals cannot fill their local board and executive positions for similar reasons. More than half of the locals don't have a constitution, and there's a widespread lack of good governance practices. And it was found that income expenses vary widely across locals, and many locals have a problematic amount of funds, either too low, which means the local is at financial risk, or too high, representing funds that are just stagnant and are not being used to serve members. So putting that all together, the output of the working group became an intermediate outcome, provide strong leadership and advocacy for maple syrup producers in Ontario, and an immediate outcome, optimize and rationalize Omspa structure for maximum impact and efficiency following organizational best practices and legislative requirements. The outputs, excuse me.
We're supposed to wait for comments, but how can you say some locals have money sitting there stagnant? Because when you have a summer tour and you only do it every 11 years, you're going to keep a reserve for when something goes bad.
Absolutely, Nelson. I think that's a very valid point. I do think that we should, if you don't mind, reserve that for the substantive discussion afterwards, because I think we could spend potentially a lot of time on that right now. I'd like to continue with the flow, and then let's revisit that. So in terms of concrete outputs, first, the board of directors is right-sized in line with organizational best practices. This would take, in concrete terms, it takes the form of a new constitution, which would involve engaging members on the proposed new structure and approval by the board. The second point is rationalizing some of the responsibilities currently vested with locals. So rationalize, what do we mean by rationalize? And so what we're looking at here is kind of looking at how member services are delivered, who the best parties are to deliver that, and then focusing the local capacity on the things that locals do best and that no one else can do but the locals, and then either greatly supporting or centralizing the delivery of the services that can be centralized. And so, for example, research and training is an excellent example of that, where a whole bunch of the burden can be taken off the locals if there is, for example, a MART center with dedicated staff that do nothing but deliver research and training to OMSPA members. And then the final.
George, I just watching the comments a bit about locals. Locals will identify training needs and what their people in that geographic region needs, and then reach out to find solutions. And the Mart Center will help provide a solution that will be delivered locally at an event organized by a local. That's the type of approach there. So try and take some of that weight off. And as well, administrative weight on some other items too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I actually can't see the comments. I have too many other things open on my screens. So yeah, thanks for that input, Randall. All right. The final outcome for Pillar 5 is the evolution of committees to reflect increased scope to activities. And again, this is an ongoing annual process. And what we're looking at here is expanding the scope or refocusing the scope of some existing committees and forming 2 new committees over the next 5 years, not right up front. One committee being the, what are we calling it now? Government and Industry Relations Committee. And the other one escapes my mind, but we can certainly get that information for you. I think it's the Data Committee, but I can't remember.
It is.
Yes, thank you. Okay, let's on to the final pillar, and thank you for your time, everyone. I know, going through the nuts and bolts of each of the pillars is a bit of heavy lifting, and I appreciate your time and attention here. So the final pillar, government and industry relations. So this has always been a part of what OMSPA's done, but it hasn't been so much of a formal focus. Starting with the strategic plan, it's proposed that it become an explicit focus of OMSPA. And there is a pretty dominant reason for why there's a strong argument it should become a primary focus, and that is realizing the goals of this strategic plan is going to require government funding, and OMSPA needs to get good at securing government funding. The Ontario Beekeepers Association stated very clearly that that was one of their core competencies that they developed, and that enables them to be the organization that they are. So the intermediate outcome for this pillar is to provide strong leadership and advocacy for maple syrup producers in Ontario. The immediate outcome, expand and entrench government and industry relations capacity, developing strong internal competencies and securing government funding for industry priorities. So the immediate outcomes that have been identified for this pillar are, the first 2 are focused on putting in place these competencies within OMSPA. So establish the capacity within OMSPAs, and then develop the competencies in securing government funding. First establish the skills and competencies in government industry relations, and then even further focus in on developing the competencies in securing government funding. And then the other 3 outputs for this pillar are all focused on securing the different categories of funding that's going to be necessary. So base funding secured, this is securing additional funding for OMSPA operations separate from any particular strategic goal. And that the majority of this base funding would actually be to pay for OMSPA salaries for an increased staff. Funding for OMSPA marketing branding campaign. So that would be the funding for the marketing branding campaigns that we discussed under Pillar 4. And then finally, secure funding for the Mart Center. And that is, again, securing funding for the center that we discussed under Pillar 3. So the dates for these are, you will see, are fairly front-loaded. The different pools of funding, we need to secure it for between the end of 2003 and the end of 2023 and the end of 2024. So that's coming up quickly. So the plan of attack calls for establishing these competencies quickly, like, before the end of this year, so that these relationships can start to be built, and these funding proposals can start to be built.
George, this also relates to at the local level, helping establish competencies at the local level to be able to work with the tourism association, the community future development organizations, etc., to help fund activities at the local level too. So that's a competency. Some of our locals are really good at that, and other ones have not approached that. So
Excellent. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Measuring progress. This strategic plan is a concrete plan that sets out very specific goals, very specific outputs, very specific activities. And part of this is it's going to set out very clearly how we are going to measure progress and success. I won't go into the details. There will be a detailed performance measurement framework, it's called. That accompanies the strategic plan as part of the implementation plan, which we'll discuss in a little bit. So just for now, I'm just going to give you a kind of a taste for what this looks like. So thinking back to our logic model and our strategic goals, our ultimate goal is to increase the value for Ontario maple syrup producers. How are we going to measure that? We're going to look at increased average per tap revenue of members, and we're going to look at increased value of Ontario maple production to Ontario's GDP. So two concrete measures that we can get readings on and that we can know exactly how we're doing, how we're trending. So looking at our intermediate outcomes, provide significant value to members in their operations. So we're going to measure member loyalty, how it increases year over year, as measuring it through the member survey. The intermediate outcome of realizing premium pricing for Ontario maple syrup due to differentiation based on quality. So we are going to track our revised best practices manuals being utilized by a growing majority of Omspa membership. And then what's the utilization of training and educational resources related to quality assurance by producers year over year. Again, concrete, measurable. The outcome of driving increases in demand for Ontario maple products. We'll be measuring increase in total amount of maple syrup produced in Ontario compared to the total amount consumed in Ontario. And finally, providing strong leadership and advocacy for maple syrup producers in Ontario. We'll be tracking member satisfaction with the leadership of Omspa, again, through member surveys. So a similar exercise will be done all the way down to the logic model for all our intermediate outcomes and our immediate outcomes. And we're going to be providing details. So not just what the indicators are, but what the current indicator says. So where are we now? What the goal is for the 5-year mark, and who's assigned responsibility. So to wrap up, let's talk about next steps. So working backwards, the final step in the strategic plan process will be for members to vote on the final version of it in February of next year, between the 9th and 15th. So how are we going to get there? So today we've done the presentation of the draft strategic plan, and the full copy of the plan is available for download on the Omspa website. Over the next month, we will be soliciting your feedback, your questions, comments, recommendations, and again, through emails to John. Also in this upcoming in the near future. At the end of November, the board is having a strategic planning workshop. And this workshop's going to have a couple of different facets. One, the board is going to look at future-oriented scenarios to really understand the board's role in the future of Ontario maple production. And then the board's also going to look at two companions to the strategic plan. There's an implementation plan. That is simply more detail on how the strategic plan is going to be realized. There's going to be budget information in there. There's going to be more detail on how the MART Center is going to work. There's going to be more detail on proposed governance. And as well, there's going to be the fully realized performance measurement framework. So that's basically like, if you like the strategic plan, you're going to love the implementation plan. But more seriously, it's really just intended as a deep dive. It's more of an operational tool. The sector development plan is like the other side of the coin from the strategic plan. The strategic plan is for us. It's for Omspa. It tells us what we need to do and what we're trying to do. The other side of the coin is we need to tell the province what they need to do, what the vision is, what they need to do to realize this vision, what the benefits for Ontario is. And so that's the sector development plan. So that's going to be developed over the next coming months as well. It's going to be a shorter document, and it's going to be a call to action to the Ontario government. And some of the primary recommendations are going to be, support our base operations through this growth phase, very much like you did for the Ontario Beekeepers Association. Financially support the founding of the MART Center. It's an essential step for Ontario's sector. So that is the board strategic planning workshop at the end of November. So the feedback from the members and the input from the board workshop will get rolled into a revised and we'll label it final draft of the strategic plan. And this is going to be presented to the membership during info days. So again, you'll have a chance to read the fully revised plan, and you'll also have a chance to really dig into the details with your local, your fellow members. In early February, this final feedback from the January info days is going to be incorporated into the final version of the strategic plan. The board is going to give its approval to the strategic plan. And then from February 9th to the 15th, the process will be turned over to members to vote on the strategic plan. If the engagement happens like it should, the members, you should really feel like you own the strategic plan and that it's yours. Omspa is, it's an association of its members for its members. And the lifeblood of the association has always been the volunteer membership input, this tremendous amount of engagement. And so, make the strategic plan yours because you're all collectively doing so much for the sector already. Final slide is just a call to action again. It gives you the link to the strategic plan. It gives you, John, your executive director's email address so that you can respond to him with your input. And that being said, I'm going to turn it back to John, and let's open up the discussion section.
Hi. We've had a lot of discussion going on in the chat, which is great. Maybe why don't we start quickly with Nelson's question about locals and the dollars in their account. And I'm going to scroll back up in the chat and start pulling questions out of that as well. George, did you want to, or someone else, Randall, discuss a bit about the dollars in bank accounts?
I can, having been involved with the analysis of it. there is the it's a multifaceted consideration. There's the revenue that the local brings in annually. There's the expenses that the local has annually, and then there is the amount in the account. And some locals live off of just their membership fees, and other locals have a pretty good track record of getting additional funds in there significantly beyond their membership fees. Now, there's some locals that live off their membership fees and don't even expend that amount every year. So the numbers have been increasing substantially. And let's say you have $12,000 in a bank account and you only spend $1,200 a year in expenses. So that's like 10 times the amount of your expenses. There might be somebody else, another local has $20,000 in their account, and you go, well, they got a lot, but their expenses annually are $7,000 because they've been able to create $7,000 of revenue, which is the fees plus the grants they've given. So in a sense that if you have 20,000 and you spend 7 annually, you have 3 years worth of run room. What often happens though is, so the one that has 12,000 has 12 years of run room, and they're not even spending as much as they're pulling in annually in revenue. So there's a
Oh, we lost you there, Randall. I think your point is that it's kind of the turnover, right? In the dollars.
My internet's unstable. Yeah, it's a turnover. So if it's like if you've got 12 times, like you get 12 times the amount that you spend every year in your account, or if you have 2 times the amount that you spend every year in your account, it's like you're holding back too much if it's 12 times too much. Like your members are being underserved.
Any comment on that?
Where do you want the
Nelson,
money
did
to
you want to
go?
respond? Yeah.
I said, where did you want the money to go? We keep it, it's there, and someday we'll use it for something. As like I said, the summer tour, your costs are going up and up and all the time. So that's something we can use to subsidize the summer tour when it comes back turn to have it in Southwestern.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, Nelson, and I understand that. It's just that, some of these things cropped up when the working group looked through all the figures, and that's just, they're bringing that point forward. That's all they're doing. So
Yeah.
whether it's right or wrong, or whether like in Eastern, we do things to raise extra money every year. So, but we probably are the ones that probably don't give enough services, in our own local. So, but just the way it works right now.
Yeah.
It's just brought forward to the membership to let them know.
And there's some locals who have $3,000 revenue annually. They have $3,000 worth of expenses, and they have only $3,000 in their bank account. And so in some sense, they only have 1 year of coverage. So they're at more significant risk per se. It's just that the local circumstances are different. And how do we make sure that the money is utilized and encourage to be able to have things happening for all members as equally as possible across the province?
Okay. And anybody else want to chime in on that quickly before we move on to a question in the chat? There was one here from, I think Jack kicked us off. Jack McFadden, how do we meet quality assurance objectives when most of Ontario's producers are not Omspa members? I think we discussed some of that in the certification possibility of that. But that's not all of it. Anybody want to respond to that? George? Or
Well, John,
Ray?
if I may, it's Ray. I respectfully suggest that those are tactics, right, in the implementation phase of trying to figure out, a lot of these items when we have questions about what is going to happen down the road, and we need to. Certainly tonight we can't answer those, and so it's going to be up to individual implementation committees under the implementation plan to determine the best approach. So, but I would summarize, build on George's point at the beginning of the presentation. There's been an amazing amount of work done in this process, and I've argued that the amount of background that we now have puts us in a great position to do the analysis of where to move ahead. So it gives us a basis of data, a basis of opinion through the surveys and the scans that have been done. And you know, obviously tonight it's not meant for individual comments. I'm going to comment. There's some, but there'll be comments of construction and clarity. I really like the approach. I like the systematic review of the priorities and then parsing that down. That gives us focus. It's highly ambitious. I at first thought that some of the predictions on the quarters of achievement were too slow. George raises a really good point that there's a lot here to swallow. It's like eating the elephant, right? One bite at a time. And so I do now agree that, you know, it's going to take us some time to do that. But I read the document twice in the last couple of days. I really like it. It flows well. It's well written. And I think it behooves all of us to really, really read it and to look at the bigger picture and not just your own operation or your own geography, but to look at the big picture and to determine, you know, where to from here. I think it's a landmark crossroads in a process. So I think we need to look at really the big picture on this thing. So, you know, to everybody, and I know a lot of people have put a pile of work into this. It's well done. So that's all I have to share. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Ray, on that. And you're correct in that aspect of it, is that there has been a pile of hours gone into this. You got to remember, this is a draft. Our peers are bringing the best solutions forward. They're not cast in stone. They're open for a discussion. They're to come back to the board, and whether they'll be implemented or not will be up to the membership. But it's there for a starting point.
At the end of the day, I've been involved in tens of hundreds of consultation processes. At the end of the day, there's got to be a decision made, and that's what the board is there for. And so, you know, because people have input, it doesn't mean that everybody's input's going to be taken into effect in the final draft and the ratification of the plan. And we need to understand that there are going to be comments I make that are not going to be incorporated, and that's fair. But I had my say, and that's what this process is about.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's are there any other questions there, John? Or are we?
Oh, there's tons of them, so but do you want to start on that now at 9:12?
Are they questions or concerns? Because if that's the case, if they're concerns, then they can write them into they're not open for debate tonight, so they can write them in for into you and bring a solution with their concerns. It's okay to have a concern, but you need to have a solution to go with it.
Yeah, tonight's not the forum to do that. We just got too many people here.
Yeah, too many people, and there's just not enough time, or an hour 45 now into it. So I'm going to bring this to a close. And I want to thank everybody for their comments and that, but please get them into John. A comment of "I don't like it" is not a good comment. It's a comment of "I don't like it, and the reasons are such, such, and such, and such," and that will be taken into consideration.
Well, sometimes, Frank, the best way is that if everybody started off their sentence that they send, here is my issue, or here is my concern.
Yep.
And that's, you know, if you start that off, here's my issue, bang, 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 here's my concern, bang, 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 or here's a potential solution, bang, 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 bang. So it gets a format and gets people commenting in that way. It's most productive way.
But I have to say one thing, in case, you know, some people think you know, the old saying is don't shoot the messenger. So please don't shoot George, because George is bringing the message, is bringing the message of the 20% of the membership who worked on this. It was your peers to do that. So I just want to say, you know, here it is. Here's the draft strategic plan. So we got 20% of our members, your peers, were involved in developing this draft plan. They contributed thousands of hours to this process. And once approved by the membership, this will set the horizons and goals for Omspa. The strategic plan does not mean we're finished. It means we're just beginning. And Omspa and its members will set the course of our destiny for the next 10 years. It's up to you to respond. It's up to you to bring the solutions. I'd just like to quote a small thing that was sent to me last week by a member producer. And it reads as follows. And this is talking about our peers. We may lack the skyscrapers and traffic of the big cities in the rurals of Ontario and Canada, but we are not lacking talent in every corner. Journalism, leadership, marketing, design, givers, tellers, teachers, caregivers, you name it, we have it. And they are all the more precious because of the tiny spotlight that they illuminate when compared to our big city counterparts. We have the people to do this. I want to thank you, Cornelia, for those words. And remember, these are your peers with talents who have drafted this document. So when you make your comments back, please be professional. Please state your concerns. Please bring the solution to go with it. And that's all I have to say tonight. George, would you like to finish off just the last little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to finish by reinforcing how tremendously impressed I've been by not only the commitment of the members to the strategic planning process, but by the output. The work of the working groups was just truly extraordinary, and I don't use that word lightly. The quality of the output was across the board of the highest quality. And I simply just don't see output like this from volunteer organizations. So I think you should all give yourselves a huge congratulations, because you've really moved mountains. And you know, the strategic plan really just fell right out of the work of the working groups. There was so much quality work there that the strategic plan was, you know, it was an exercise of weaving the really strong, well thought out recommendations and analysis together. So again, I think you collectively have something you should be extremely proud of. And now let's put in the extra hard work to make it that much better, and to make sure that the concerns of all the members are reflected in it.
Thank you very much, George.
I agree. Well said.
So I want to thank everybody for participating tonight. And I'm sorry it took a little longer than we had planned, but it's good to hear the people's thoughts and concerns, and all your comments will be recorded. And please get them in. It's just, the sooner the better. The sooner that they're into us, while it's fresh in your minds. Thank you again very, very, very much.
Fantastic.